All right, we need to talk about IP addressing. So there's all different things that we consider in regards to connecting to our network, but some of the most important things to consider is what your identity is when you're connecting to your network and of course other networks around the world. So there's public IP addressing, private IP addressing, and this thing called a subnet mask. So we're going to go over some of the most important numbers that make all of this work. And there are certain numbers that you need to know as far as ranges, and two specific numbers that you need that are special or different than the others. So please take out your flashcards or your note paper and let's make this happen. All right, I'm going to put a few things on my screen here so you can take a look. And we will start with just some cool pictures I actually found on Google. So none of these graphics are ours, but I feel like this is the perfect walkthrough for this lesson. So we need to take a look at public versus private IP addressing. And the first thing I want you to look at are these ranges. Let me make that a little bit bigger on your screen. All right, so the classes that we are concerned with per se at the A+ level are Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. So when you take a look at this list, or the ranges, these are the public IP ranges for each class, meaning class A goes from 1 through 126. Now on your screen you have it in long form, meaning 1.0.0.0 through 126.255.255.255. And in long form, that's the best way to put it. When we talk about it and we try and shorten things, you need to understand that 1 through 126 means everything from 1.0.0.0 through 126.255.255.255. So I even said it super fast there. And I want you to get used to the normal jargon or the way people speak in IT because, well, you're headed into the career yourself. Now, class B, as in Bravo, starts at 128.0.0.0. And it goes all the way through 191.255.255.255. Well, what does that mean? That means everything that is between 128 and 191 is in the class B section for IPv4 addressing. And class C starts at 192.0.0.0 and goes through 223.255.255.255. Now, if you noticed, we skipped a number here between class A and B. And the number that we skipped was 127, which means there's a whole range in there, right? 127.0.0.0 through 127.255.255.255. Now, what I need you to understand is right in that range is what we call testing. And we use specifically this address called a loopback address. And that address has a specific ID, and it is 127.0.0.1. So if you're taking notes or making flashcards, your loopback address is 127.0.0.1. Now there was one more address I told you wanted to write down that was special or separate, and that is 169.254. And that's what we call an APIPA address. It's this special automatic address that gets assigned to any PC that can't get a hold of an actual IP address for whatever reason. So when I say 169.254, you'll notice that I didn't really go with any other numbers, but there has to be 4 sets there. So 169 is one part, and 254 is the next part. And .x is usually how we'll say it because it doesn't really matter what the next 2 numbers are. It could be 0.0, 0.1, 0.2, all the way up through something like 254.254 or 255.255. Doesn't even matter. But the 169.254 part matters a lot. Well, let's take a step from the public range, which means the whole range, and let's take a look at some of the numbers that are addressed in the private range. I'll make that a little bit bigger for you. So the private IP ranges for each class are on your screen. Class A private range is what we call 10 dot. And I stop with the dot because it doesn't matter what comes after that as long as the numbers are between 0 and 255. Another short form to write this is 10.x.x.x because again, it doesn't matter what comes after the 10. If you hear an IP address that starts with 10 dot anything, it's going to be private class A. Class B is anything between 172.16 and 172.31. Now again, you didn't hear me go through the zeros and the 255s because you have to get used to the fact that we're just looking for the network ID portion, and I will explain that here in just a few seconds. But anything that falls between 172.16 and 172.31 equals private Class B. Now, Class C has a private range that'll always start with 192.168. I don't have to go further past that because 192.168.x.x covers the whole thing. Those are your private ranges for the classes you're worried about. Now, I said part of something would be a network ID, and that means the rest of it would be a host ID, and this is going to help understand which parts are which. Now, in Class A, we have a default subnet mask of 255.0.0.0. What the heck does that mean? That means that the first octet or first number is the network identifier. Remember when I said 10 dot equals private Class A? Well, all I needed was the 10 because only the first section or octet is a network identifier. Everywhere where you see host here, where the zeros are, those are for the device ID. And when I'm looking at IP addresses and troubleshooting, the first thing I want to know is what network somebody's on. So if they're on a Class A network, I actually only need the first number, that 1 through 126. As soon as they give me that, I can start narrowing down where the problem is. Now, Class B has a default subnet mask of 255.255.0.0, which means the first two octets are important, which means I won't just need the first number, but I'll need to actually say whatever number it is, dot, whatever the next number is, and that will identify the network. The last two sections of the IPv4 address in this case are going to identify the singular device. Class C has a default subnet mask of 255.255.255.0, which means the first three are going to be the network identifier, and the last section is the host identifier. So let's take a look at a different picture and help explain that more. Now you see a bunch of ones and zeros, and I'm actually going to click on something that's a little simpler here and then jump back. So this guy is going to show you the difference in color coding to try and break it down. You'll see part of this is red and part of it's blue. The red part here is the network ID, and the blue part is the computer or host ID. So if the first two octets or sections, meaning all the X's and all the Y's, if those are the network ID, what class do you think this is? Well, let's go back to our chart and take a look. I'm looking at two different sections that are the network ID and two that are the host ID. Well, that means that that is a Class B subnet. Is it starting to make sense? All right, let's get back to all those crazy ones and zeros. So this chart is very similar to the one that we were just looking at, where we have 255.0.0.0, which means it's a Class A default subnet mask. That just means, again, that only this first section here is our network identifier. Well, what does that mean for the last section of it? That means all three parts of whatever the IP address is after that is the device identifier. So take a look at B and C. How many octets, or how much of the IP address for a Class B subnet mask, are going to be considered for the network ID? Well, the correct answer is 2. The first two are 255.255, which means the first two octets equal the network ID, and the last two octets equal the device ID. Now, I keep saying this funny name, octets. Where does that come from? Well, count the number of ones in each of these sections. Take a look up here. How many ones do you see? 8. 8 ones equals an octet. And that's not the most appropriate way for me to say that. 8 ones or zeros equal an octet. And there can be ones or zeros here because we are counting in binary. The next section here is made up of 8 zeros. That's still an octet, it's just they're all zeros. All the bits are off in comparison to all the bits here that are ones, those are on. So let's not get too far into binary and let's just keep it surface level here. So let's review. We have our private IP addresses, and those are a small range within our public IP addresses. You need to know these numbers for real-life troubleshooting of network issues, as well as any CompTIA or Cisco tests that you'll be taking. You also need to understand how subnet masks divide and identify the network ID versus the computer or host ID. Take a look at this example. We have the first 3 sections identifying the street and the last section identifying the house. Now, I don't want you so much to pay attention to the numbers here, but just the example to compare it to something you're familiar with. I'll make it bigger for you. There you go. So if the first 3 sections are the street name, that means it's identifying kind of where we're at in the city, right? But when I ask you for your house number or the numbers of your address, that's your specific house. So this is a good example to help you understand what's going on with an IP address network versus device side, meaning the street name versus the home address. The first section is the network ID. And with this being 3 octets or 3 numbers for the network ID, well, what class do you think this subnet mask would be? Well, this would actually be class C, right? 255.255.255.0. 1, 2, and 3 octets are 255s. That identifies the network portion. And all zeros at the end identify the device portion. So when we look at this, the street portion is the equivalent of our network ID, and the house portion is the equivalent of our device ID. Hopefully that helps break down what is going on with IP addresses, why we use subnet masks, and what they help us to identify. These are critical pieces of information. Now again, I did a simple Google search for public IP address, private IP address, and subnet masks to find the images that I shared with you. And it'll take you a very simple search to go find those charts, but I want you to write this stuff down. Writing it down is going to help you remember, and making flashcards means that you can practice. Practice with coworkers, your kids, your spouse, whoever you have around you. The more practice you have, the better you're going to be in real life and more prepared you will be for your test. So get certified and get paid. That's our goal. And right now, I just want you to focus on really getting into your good study habits so that if I come and ask you, what is 10.10.11.12? You could immediately answer me with private class A. You want to get that good with these numbers because they're with you always. Your cell phone has an IP address, your laptop has an IP address, your workstation has an IP address, and you need to understand what parts of it mean what. All right, study this, watch it again if you need to. You're not making any of these numbers from scratch, and you're not counting in binary yet, but you're just able to break down an IPv4 address and understand the different parts. We'll see you again soon for our next lesson.